My goal to talk about open science is basically to bring a new set, it might be for some of the researchers here, a new set of ideas and concepts that I think are very important to keep in mind and to keep close in modern 21st century science. This is what I will do. I will start by defining open science and tell you what I mean by this. I will then try to convince you what went wrong with the classical way of doing science. And I will really provide you evidence that things seem to be as bad as I am going to paint them for you. But I will end the presentation in a positive note. I will talk about important novelties and available tools that are now being developed to help you to do things the best way possible. So let's start. Open science. What is this? Essentially, open science is a global approach to science. It's a philosophy of behavior. And the most important ideas behind this is to make research open, reproducible, replicable, transparent, and to avoid malpractices and fraud as much as possible. And as much as possible to share, to make things freely available. Please remember that approaches related to open science are nowadays starting to become mandatory at various funding boards. I provide here some examples both in Europe, in the US, and also Japan starts to implement some of these measures too. So this is current state-of-the-art discussion being held in science worldwide. Why do we even have to do this? Let's think positively, to contribute to robust and to speedy scientific discovery, so to improve quality of science. Also because sharing materials allows to get constructive feedback. When you share, people can look into your work, and it's easier to identify problems if there are, to fix them. It helps to improve the quality of published research because it's much more accountable. It increases relevance. It maximizes public benefit. Basically, money invested in research is better spent. It avoids wasting resources. And as I said before, it helps meeting expectations from funders. Here are the main pillars that are at the base of what I mean by open science. Data, as much as possible, should be openly available. We should share materials, code, analysis code, as much as possible. We should share the methodology used in our experiments and in our analysis. All materials, all papers, data sets should be openly and freely accessible. Results in published research should be reproducible, should be replicable in new experiments. Another associated idea is that also reviews from published work, as much as possible, should be open and signed. And parallel development, educational resources to help people to do open science should also be developed and fostered. Having given this small introduction to open science, you might ask, what is wrong with the way we have been doing science? Well, actually, several things are wrong, and I will talk about that now. One of the first problems is that we focused too much in the last decades on publishing positive results. As we know, often journals prioritize novel and exciting results. Results that do not meet these labels tend to be rejected and not published. This has led to what we now call a false positive literature. a literature that is biased against the null hypothesis of no effects. And this has, as a consequence, led to a distortion in the literature. The bad effect of it is that a lot of research teams try to replicate results that are published, and they fail and fail and fail. And there is solid evidence that this is the case. For example, from Fanelli, 2010, across several fields in science. Here you see plotted percentages of papers that report support for the hypothesis that they tested. Observe that it's usually 70% or more of the results published are in favor of the theories that they anticipated, which is, of course, unrealistic. Why is it unrealistic? Because when we run tests and we fit models and we test theories, negative results should also occur, of course. Negative results means when you fail to find support for your own research question. The problem is, this is hard to publish. Even if your experiment design is healthy, journals typically do not like to publish negative results because they are not novel and especially not exciting. This created the so-called file drawer problem. Results that are not statistically significant tend to go into the file drawer and never see the light of day again. But a lot of people contend that actually negative results have a lot of good information in them. It can help to shape future research. Part of the problem is that sometimes we stopped being true scientists, and true scientists always ask, always inquire, even if results are published, even if they are published in high impact factor journals, it matters not. We should always ask, is this true? Is this possible? Could this in any way be wrong? I used the logo of the Royal Society to highlight this idea, and their motto in Latin is, take nobody's word for it. So we should always question, always wonder, never fully accept. And at some point we stopped doing that because if the result is published, it's a positive finding and statistically significant, we sometimes accept it too much. Also, the problem of a sprinting marathon is affecting us. We tend to have to work fast, have to publish a lot. So we prioritize fast, low-powered studies. And studies that take longer, require larger sample sizes, are pushed back. Also, journals, up to recently at least, were dismissing replication papers because they are not novel or exciting. And this created a problem. One of the problems that we had is that we ignored warnings. We had people since the 1960s telling us that the way we were doing science was not perfect. Paul Neal, for example, already in 1960s was telling us, be careful, because we are basically using the same data to test hypotheses and create new hypotheses, all with the same data. We are not separating exploratory from confirmatory research. This is dangerous, he said. Jacob Cohen, the father of the power analysis, was also warning since early 1960s. He was saying, people, most of your designs are low power. The sample sizes are too small. You are making too strong conclusions based on low powered experiments. Be careful of false positives. But it took decades until people took Cohen's words seriously. Look at John Ioannidis in 2005. This is a super cited paper nowadays. It's 15 years old. And he was arguing why most published research findings are false. This paper is mostly a theoretical exercise, but it serves a strong point. The way we have been doing science led to a lot of false positives being taken as evidence for effects. What about researchers? Should we blame them? I have a very specific opinion about this. I think sometimes yes. Of course, we all know that sometimes there are bad researchers doing bad things. I have here a list of some notable bad cases of bad researchers. And if you go to this website, Retraction Watch, you will have a whole list of people who basically embraced science the wrong way. It's what I call a wall of shame. Open science can help to minimize this, but it will never eliminate this. In very simple words, people that want to do it the wrong way will always try the wrong way. So open science will not cater for them, but it will minimize, for sure, a lot of problems that have been occurring. I am of the strong opinion that for the vast majority of researchers, they are not to be blamed. Often researchers are unaware of their actions. And they also know very well that by doing things the wrong way, they risk too much. So they try to avoid doing things the wrong way. So if you ask me, how can you explain all the mistakes that have been done? I think it's a combination of factors. Poor training, statistical and methodological training, poor practices in the field, and people tend to continue to do as they learned from their supervisors. Current publication system, incentive to publish and to do fast research, and wrong career incentives to get promoted, famous, and tenured. This is what we now know globally, is globally known as a questionable research practice. And these QRPs, in short, are not necessarily fraud. They include the abuses of acceptable research practices, but they are not necessarily fraud. They can be done by mistake easily. The problem is that they can introduce bias. They can inflate power, meaning they can give you a misguided idea that what you are finding is actually weaker than you think. And results are not replicable, meaning other research centers try to replicate these results and they just don't find what was published originally. And I have here a small list of these type of activities that sometimes people engage with that can create problems. For instance, omitting dependent variables, and people only report the ones that worked for them in their papers, and they mention nothing about the attempts that failed. The same for omitting some conditions. Only the ones that work are reported in their research papers. Sequential testing, where people test and test and test until the level of significance reaches below alpha, below 5% very often, and then they write their papers. Or only reporting the statistically significant findings and not the non-statistically significant findings. P-hacking, which means massaging data and analysis until P becomes so small that it becomes statistically significant. Playing with outliers, with predictors, with whatever until P is small. Also harking. Harking means hypothesizing after the results are known. This means you have data, you run a whole set of analyses, and then depending on the analyses, you select the ones that work the best for you, and then you write your paper. You create a research hypothesis that goes into your introduction based on results that actually you only found when you analyze your data. So you're reversing the natural order of research. Another problem is researchers' degrees of freedom. And by this, I mean that researchers usually have a lot of freedom in their hands to set up their experiments, determine their analyses, and they get to select everything in each step of the way. In the one hand, it might sound good, but actually too much freedom might mean you get to nitpick, to carefully select what worked for you. That's not necessarily what works in the long run. So it's always very possible to manipulate results in favor of our own theories. This is now known as researcher degrees of freedom. And this has contributed to inflate false positives, meaning to publish papers talking about new findings that actually are much weaker than the researchers thought. Here is a small example, research on studying depression. And these researchers realized that there are 7 scales available to study depression. Altogether, they combine 52 symptoms or 52 questions, if you prefer. That means there are 7 different types of sum scores research can resort to try to study depression. All of them are known as level of depression. But sometimes we now realize that researchers tend to choose some scales of depression over other scales of depression because some scales are more favorable for their purposes than others. Because they have the freedom to do so, they do so. Related to the researcher degrees of freedom, we have what Andrew Gelman, the eminent statistician from Columbia University, what he termed as the garden of forking paths. This means that once you have a data set available, you have many ways you can analyze those data. You can select which predictors you want to include, which you want to exclude. What is the model you want to fit? How do you deal with your outliers? How do you deal with your influential points? There's millions of options of what you can try. Usually what people do is that they try a lot, and at the end, they select the most favorable outcomes. This is not necessarily p-hacking. It should be more acknowledged when you write the paper that you did it. And usually people don't do that. And harking, which I mentioned before, hypothesizing after the results are known. Here, I decided to add a lengthy quote from now a famous researcher, famous for all the wrong reasons. His name is Daryl Bem, and he's known from research on precognition, looking into the future. And in this quote, if you read carefully, what Bem is suggesting people should do, and please make no mistake, this is what you should not do. He suggests just go on a fishing expedition, essentially. He did say it himself. Try everything you can when you have your data. You look your data up, down, left, right. Try everything, analyze everything, until you find something statistically significant, which is what Bem wanted. Try everything. And he says it's fair and open game. The truth is it's not, unless exploration is explicitly stated. You can do this only if you state clearly in your paper, I did a whole lot of exploration and then I found this and this and that. If you don't do that, and you just go to your introduction and you change your research question, and then you use the answer that you found to answer your pseudo question, then you're doing science the wrong way. And of course, Bem did not realize this. A lot of people did not realize this. Now we are realizing that this is just bluntly wrong. Also, we have to mention bad incentives contributed to the current situation. The fact that we all know this. We have to publish or we will perish as researchers. We want to get tenured. We want to get grants. And not all of us, but some of us do want recognition, want to get press coverage and win prizes. So all of these put pressure, and we try sometimes more than we should to get things done. Also, we have to acknowledge, and I am a statistician by formation, so we did not teach statistics always in the best way, and people were misguided. They think methods can do more for them than they can actually do. Also a problem that we keep on doing things we were taught, but if we were taught doing things the wrong way, that means we are now doing things the wrong way. And this is also part of the problem. And I have painted a very black picture right now. And maybe some of you are thinking, you know, George must be overreacting. And now I will provide you evidence that this is really not the case. For example, in medicine, here's a paper from, again, John Ioannidis, 2005. And he has findings showing that some results were largely not replicable. Sometimes replications found contradictions in comparison to the original papers. They had effects in the opposite direction instead of what was published originally. Another example from medicine, a paper from Begley and Ellis, 2012. They also tried to replicate 53 papers, results in 53 papers. Results were only confirmed in 11% of the cases. And there's more research papers in this direction. Economics. A study that tried to replicate 18 previous published results. And with very high power, 90% probability of detecting the effects, the same size of the original studies. What they found is that 61% only of the papers had effects in the same direction, of size 66% of the original papers, which means we now have problems to find the same effects that were published originally, and they are of much smaller size than it was stated originally. Social science, it's a minefield in the social sciences. This team tried to replicate 21 results. They found 62% of replications pointing at effects in the same direction, but the effect sizes are about half of what was claimed in the original papers. In various fields, Baker 2016 is a very interesting paper. It has findings across scientific fields. Here you see percentage of published literature that is reproducible. And of course, you can see that there's a lot of studies that just failed to reproduce the original findings. Baker asked researchers, have you failed to reproduce an experiment? And observed the light pink bar, they were asking about their own results, not only researchers from other centers, but their own. And people have problems to replicate their own results. They were also asked, what do you think is going on? Why can't people reproduce and replicate original findings? And there are several reasons mentioned. I referred to all of them previously. Selective reporting what they found, pressure to publish, so they make the paper seem stronger than it actually is, low statistical power, and so on, and so on, and so on. So, let me answer this question very conclusively. Is the panorama really that bad? My answer is a very strong yes. I provide here, because I don't have time, of course, to talk about all of these sources. I provide here more sources, and these are all linkable functions. I did not mention, but the slides will be available. They are already available on my webpage, and on the HIRAKU-Global, we will also make these slides available. So you can access the slides later, and you can follow up on these citations if you want. Interestingly, this has been talked for a long time that it could go down this way. Even since 1830, Babbage was already predicting, because, you know, they are humans doing research, things could go the wrong way. So we should not all feel surprised that it turned out this way. Monafo has a very interesting take on the problem. Here you probably recognize the very classical hypothetical deductive model for science. And what Monafo did was add to the circle in red the problems that can occur at each stage of the scientific method. So you can see what can go wrong at each stage, from developing research hypotheses, through designing the method, through collecting data, analyzing, and publishing. It's very interesting because it clearly identifies how things can derail at each stage. This is bad because public trusts us. Most of us working, for example, for public institutions, we use public money. We have to give good account of tax money that is entrusted in us to do research. And if it is known that people are not doing research well, this will affect trust, and funders will have problems to give us money in the future. So we have to be careful also, because this might hurt funding possibilities in the future. And this is as a dark horror movie as I could portray it to you. But I don't want to end the presentation in a bad tone. I want to be constructive. So for the rest of my talk, I will talk about positive things. And these are good tools that are now available that you can start using to make things better and make a difference. So let's be positive now and let's be constructive. The first thing I want to talk about is the so-called COS, Center for Open Science. It's a big universe and it offers many services. The Open Science Framework, which I will talk about in next slide, and also about pre-registrations and registered reports. I'm also going to talk about these. And they also talk about open science badges. For those that care about that, depending on the journals you publish an open science paper now, you can get a badge on it that certifies that you followed a healthy scientific system that led to the results you found in your paper. And people are starting to ask to have that in their papers because they can add that to their CV to increase the trust of the scientific community in their work. About the Open Science Framework, which belongs to this Open Science Center. It is, so there's a web link that you can follow through. You can see this later if you want. It basically allows us to share everything we want. You can share your data, materials, papers. And remember that by doing that, you will be essentially bypassing publisher paywalls. Remember that not everyone has the ability to pay very expensive fees to access papers. And I actually believe we should not have to pay. Papers were already paid by tax money. They should be available for free to anyone who wants to read them. This is the reason why, for example, for the last few years, I decided to share everything I do. And here's a screenshot of one of the pages where I'm sharing my own material. I share my papers. I share my appendices. I share my analysis codes. Everything is online. No one has to pay anything. You can download. If you want to use, you can use. If you want to criticize my work, you can open my files and check. Everything is openly available. And this will help to increase robustness, in this case, with respect to me, my work. This is one of the possibilities that OSF allows now. Sharing preprints. And this might not be new for everyone. For example, there is a preprint archive, a preprint server that is available now for 30 years. So perhaps some of the people in the audience must be thinking, well, in my field, we already share preprints for many years. But if you look in other fields, for example, biology, chemistry, and social sciences, these are less than 10 years old. What does this mean, sharing preprint? Sharing your paper. Don't wait for the paper to be published and possibly you have to pay to access for it. Put it online. Let people be able to download and read your paper for free. You can check whether the journals allow for this or not. And when I submit my papers to a journal, I only select journals now that allow to submit preprints for free in public servers. So this is what I do these days and for the last few years of my career. I submit a paper to a journal and I immediately put it online. There's a website that you can visit. You can download the paper. You can read. You can even give me feedback if the paper is still being peer reviewed by the journal. I will still be able to adapt it before it becomes permanently published. This is as open as it gets. Some of you might be thinking, and this is one of the criticisms that sometimes you receive. Just last week, if you paid attention to the news, there was a huge wave of shock in Australia because research funder decided to kick out from the application procedure applicants that actually cited preprints in their applications. And I'm sure this will lead to some sort of revolution over there because this is just downright not acceptable. You might think because preprints are still not peer-reviewed, they are of low quality. I have here a notable exception to that I hope serves to prove the rule. One of the most famous math problems of all times, it is known as the Poincaré conjecture, actually only has a published solution in arXiv, in an open preprint server. It was never published in a journal, as we know it. We're talking about a big thing. This is a problem that once solved allowed the author to win $1 million and to win a Fields Medal, which is the equivalent of a Nobel Prize medal given to mathematicians every 4 years. It's that special. Of course, the author is a very special guy. He refused both. He's not into money or fame. But it serves the point. If you want to see the proof of one of the most famous problems of all time, it's open, freely available. And for those who understand it, you can download and read it. And that's how research should be, open and available within, or as much as possible, within respecting privacy of everyone. We should share as much as we can. Pre-registration. What is this? This means that nowadays, if you want, you can basically upload the details of your experiments, put them online. What conditions are you manipulating? What is the sample sizes that you are intending to collect? What variables you will measure? What are the models that you entertain fitting to your data? This will get time-stamped. You put online, you can make it private. You can put it online with a time ban. No one can read it, but it is still time-stamped. You can still prove later that you have uploaded it on that day, that time. And then you can conduct your experiment. As you would normally do with a normal paper, you can write your paper. The secret then is you write your paper following the protocol that you time-stamped, and you can prove later, see, I found these effects, they are in my paper, and I did not cherry pick. I did not p-hack. I did not hark my results. It's time-stamped, it's online, it's a proof that my research is healthy and I did it in the right order. I asked my questions first, collected my data, and answered my questions after that. This is what we call now pre-registration. And there are several ways you can use to upload your pre-registrations if you want, OSF, or as predicted, or clinical trials. In the medical field, this is not as new as I'm making it sound. In other fields, for example, social sciences, this is definitely a new thing. Registered reports, a slightly different take on the pre-registrations. And the idea with registered reports is that you essentially write a paper in 2 stages. Stage 1 consists of the introduction and methods section. You write the intro and methods, and you send to the journal. It will be peer-reviewed. And the paper, or the first half of the paper, will be judged on its merits, not on the results, but on the research questions being asked, the quality of your experiment, the quality of your manipulations. Do you, ahead of time, have good power to detect the size of the effects you plan to detect? Do the methods that you plan to use, do they actually contribute to answer your research questions? That will be assessed at stage 1. If your paper is approved, is accepted, you get what we call in-principle acceptance. This means you can now go to your lab, collect your data, analyze it, write the results, write the discussion, send what we call now a stage 2 paper. As long as you adhere to your stage 1 principles, to the methods that were approved by the journal, there is no question the journal will publish your paper. As long as you have an in-principle acceptance in stage 1, and for the rest of the paper, you follow that procedure, it will be published, it will be accepted straight away. What is the major advantage of working in this way? You avoid publication bias. You avoid that journals only accept positive findings, because it can happen that you get an in-principle acceptance, you collect data, fit your models, analyze the results, and you get no small p-value. No problem, the journal will still publish your paper. Also very important for me is the fact that journals get to accept your paper based on the quality of your work, not conditional on what results you find. It doesn't matter if you find novel or exciting results. It will be published because your study was worth publishing. This is increasing, and there is a link here that you can follow to see which journals now allow for this. And I'm talking about all the way up to Nature, who allows now for registered reports to be published. There's over 300 journals that now allow for this. So let me wrap up. So what can I say? What can I advise you in case you are, let's say, mildly interested to try something? My best advice is don't try to change everything in one day. I tend to change one thing at a time. And I only change things that I'm comfortable with, that I think, indeed, I wasn't doing that well, let me try to do better. For example, sharing my preprints was the easiest thing that I changed some 3 or 4 years ago. Sharing all my materials. Don't try to change everything in a day. It's what I call crazy. It's just too difficult. Also, adapt things to your field. For example, some of you might work with data that are very private. You cannot just share bluntly all the data because you're not allowed to. Then you don't. Share what you can, don't share what you cannot. Adapt to your needs. I have here an extra set of suggestions. Of course, I don't have time to go through all of them, so I decided to provide web links so you can collect more information from these if you so want. For example, I will only mention briefly Sherpa Romeo. If you want to determine, before you submit a manuscript to a journal, what are the open science policies of the journal? For example, does the journal allow you to also share your preprint or not? Visit this website, type in the name of the journal, see what are the policies of the journal, and then you can decide what is the best or where is the best place to publish your papers. Finally, about open science in Japan, I honestly don't know very much still. I'm still trying to learn. I have tried to gather information. For the most, I have found some outdated websites, an outdated or inactive Twitter account. So I'm still not entirely sure whether this is very active in Japan. If someone knows, please contact me and share with me what you know about this. And I hope in the next few years, because I now live and work in Japan, I hope I can also contribute to make this state of affairs in Japan better, more active, and contribute to open science also in this country to make things better here. So please, by all means, I hope we can all embrace open science, its principles, and make things better as much as possible.